remediation of wells 4 and 5 in Merrimack that it contaminated with PFAS. Saint-Gobain has been identified by DES as the potential responsible party. As such, Saint-Gobain entered a maintenance agreement with Merrimack that is scheduled to end in 2025. Senate Bill 341 does a good job in outlining the history of the issue since 2016, the town's involvement in trying to resolve this issue, and the state's involvement in lowering the acceptable PFAS level in 2020. Saint-Gobain agreed to remediation for 5 years, starting in 2020, but beginning October 27, 2025, the total cost of cleanup going forward would fall on the residents of Merrimack. DES predicts the total resolution of this pollution would take much, much longer, meaning that the cost of a long-term solution would be totally borne on the backs of Merrimack residents for generations to come. The issue here, Mr. Chairman, is whether the residents of a community should be forced to pay the cleanup cost of pollution made by a private company, even as that company continues to pollute. The Merrimack community has done its part in trying to resolve this issue, but unlike Saint-Gobain's remediation with the New York community, where Saint-Gobain is responsible in perpetuity until the pollution issue is resolved, that is not the case here, but it should be, and Senate Bill 341 would make that possible. Options for litigation have been exhausted, and the community of Merrimack comes to the state to seek assistance in ensuring that this injustice does not continue. On behalf of the community of Merrimack, I respectfully ask that the committee find Senate Bill 341 ought to pass so that relief can be brought to the community and that Saint-Gobain be held responsible for the damages it has done to the community and the cleanup that needs to occur. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Questions from the Senator? Seeing none. Thank you. Dave Gouve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. For the record, my name is Dave Gouve. I'm a Senior Vice President for Public Policy with the Business and Industry Association, which serves as New Hampshire statewide Chamber of Commerce. And for the next 3 days, I'm also serving as interim president, a role I will be quite happy to give up starting next Monday when our new president takes over. The BIA is here today in opposition to Senate Bill 341, and in the spirit of full transparency, I do want the committee to know that Saint-Gobain is a member of the Business and Industry Association, but I'm appearing here today in opposition not so much because of Saint-Gobain, but because I believe Senate Bill 341 sets a far-reaching and bad public policy in New Hampshire, which is an attempt by the legislature to get involved in a legal settlement between an entity, a business entity, and a community. Were this bill to go forward, every business in New Hampshire and businesses considering coming to New Hampshire would wonder about the possibility of the general court, the legislature, intruding into a legal agreement between that company and the community in which they reside. I'm not minimizing the issue in Merrimack. I'm a former Merrimack resident. I lived there for more than 10 years. But the proper venue to deal with an issue like this is within New Hampshire's court system, not at the legislature. We believe it's inappropriate for the legislature to have a bill directed at a single company representing a single problem that should and could be decided within our court system. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to try and address any questions.
Senator Gouve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dave. Good morning. I'm not familiar with the details of the legal settlement, but does that settlement offer the opportunity for future pleadings when we discover new information, or is it shut down for good?
I think that's an excellent question, Senator Gouve, but I have to say I'm not completely up to speed on the details either. I didn't participate in any of the many meetings associated with coming to the agreement. My general understanding of how things work in this country, though, is that their litigation is always possible and there's always a remedy up through the Supreme Court. Once the Supreme Court has decided on something, that generally ends a case. But I don't know the specific details of the agreement.
Follow-up?
Question, Mr. Chairman, if I might. Is there anyone present that can answer that question as far as the ability to seek further legal remedies as opposed to a legislative remedy? Is there anyone here that can speak to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? I have a question. Just for the general public, obviously they're watching, how did this end up in the courts in the first place? Who filed the complaint?
Are you asking how the settlement came about, or are you asking how this legislation came about?
No, how originally the first complaint against Cobain, who filed the complaint? Was it the state? Was it the town? Was it an individual?
I don't know. I know we have a representative from Environmental Services here in the room. Perhaps they could answer that, but I don't know the answer to that question.
All right, thank you. No further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Alan Brooks?
Thank you. My name is Alan Brooks. I'm representing the Department of Justice. And I am in opposition. We are in opposition, but I just want to make it clear we are only opposed to page 4, lines 7 and 8. Those lines say, if any of the payments are not timely made by St. Gobain Performance Plastics, the Office of the Attorney General shall seek such a remedy through any means appropriate. We are in opposition because we believe that that violates the separation of powers clause, and that it is up to the Attorney General to decide whether or not to take such action.
Would the word may be better?
Yes, the word may would actually remedy that problem.
Okay. Is that it?
That is all.
Well done. Any questions from the
Thank you,
committee?
Senator.
Senator Gouve?
Repeating are you in any position knowledgeable enough about the settlement to state that further litigation can ensue, or is this settlement shut it down for good? In other words, 5 years, or can the communities that are affected or any other plaintiff reopen this and move it forward based on new information or, longer period of time for remediation or whatever? Can you answer that question?
Thank you, Senator. I have read the agreement, and I don't want to give a legal opinion, but in broad terms, I can tell you that my understanding is that on its face, there is a time certain after which St. Gobain may not have to pay, although the town of Merrimack may have a different interpretation. I believe there's also an indemnity provision that St. Gobain would interpret to say that even if for some reason St. Gobain were required to pay, that actually the town has to pay St. Gobain back, meaning indemnify them. The town would have a different interpretation of that clause. So I'm certain that there are things that the parties could disagree with and that the courts could provide a forum to resolve, but that's my understanding of the broad terms of that settlement.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator.
Does anybody else want to comment on this bill in the audience? Seeing how there's nobody else to sign up? Going once, going twice. We're going to close the hearing on 341. So we got to What time's the next one, 3:15?
Yeah.
And you want to tell Sonia that, no, wait, Jeb. Okay, we're gonna start on time. Nothing, I'm good, I gotta, yeah. No? Wrong one. Grab this one. Welcome, Senator, how are you?
Well, there's a bill over in Congress, and here I am.
All right.
Yeah, this is why we had the water trust settle with water settle. Yeah, I'll read it.
Yeah.
I'll read it now. You know, you see why they're required, because if it says that, this company now they're providing water and pay for it, and they can pull. Of course, they can, it's like the asbestos
Of course.
stuff.
However, you know, the Washington community,
What else are you gonna do?
what can the community do about it? So they gotta be, that's not fair.
Well, I mean, we've been saying this now, we looked at that $50 million bond that we set in my bill last year, for 2 years ago. You know, with the private governments, and then if we get this, if we get a big settlement, you know, from the manufacturers, which we will, it'll be a few years from now, we will, we'll be able to, you know, make the taxpayers and the state whole for that $50 million, but, you know, this shouldn't be on our mind.
Exactly, that's my concern. So I'm waiting for Senator Bradley, and we'll get started. I gotta talk.
Fine. You got a second? No. I'll be quick. Two things. The applicant recommended, I really listened, you know, thought very carefully what was said on 1/2012. And it, you know, it was the reach and it's the law. And I thought, the more I thought of it, let's get rid of 2012. Let's just now, you know, like everything else, from now on. Just use it. I think it makes sense, no, but I think it makes sense, you know, which I'm glad you brought it up. And then the other thing is on the, some of those folks, you know, a couple years ago, we had that bill here, right? But it was on the board. It's heard since indication we're not happy this time around. So what are we doing?
Is this the one that sets the fees?
Yeah, I mean, we give it all back to them, which is devastating. With, you know, what happened with Forest Lake and all, you know, some of the stuff was great. But reality is what it is. So what it is, I can remember sets up a fund, essentially with that UBS helping municipalities suffer from reducing waste. See, there are new grants, the funds that we will grants during
Would that establish a fee or so it's all gonna be Fed money?
yeah, now what I do say, look, I do put in there $500,000 funds that know I'm hoping to get this started. You'll see it. I just want to get it. Sure.
Get my skinny little body through here. All right. Yeah. It's under the sweater. Yeah. All right, so we're going to open up the hearing to SB 271. We're going to hear from the prime sponsor. Welcome, Senator Bradley.
Morning. Sorry I was late.
No, well,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Glad to be here. For the record, Jeb Bradley, Senate District 3. First off, let me thank all of the co-sponsors of this bill. I think everybody on the committee just about is a co-sponsor of the bill, so thank you for that. It's a pretty simple bill. It allows the PUC to revise its order affecting the Burgess Power Plant. The folks from Burgess are here that can better explain the exact provisions of the bill. But I was pleased to be the sponsor of the bill that set the Burgess Power Plant in motion several years ago. It is a biomass plant in Berlin that produces 75 megawatts of base load power, 24/7 power, from an indigenous fuel source, wood chips in New Hampshire. It is part of our energy mix. It's a reliable source of power. Fuel diversity, I think, especially in this day and age, is very, very important. So when the bill was passed a few years ago, the way it was adopted by the Public Utilities Commission, and I think the Burgess people can explain this, but it had a sort of a cost override factor that has led to the prospect of the plant not being able to operate due to that PUC order. So what this bill does is set the stage for that order to be revised so the plant can continue to operate. You'll probably hear testimony about costs of this plant to ratepayers. I think there's an acknowledgement there are some costs like there have been with biomass in the past, but I think you'll also hear testimony that had costs been fairly assessed for where this power goes into the grid, it would not have led to the kind of cost overrides that some people claim. I think what's a little bit different today, unlike 4 or 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, but today are the warnings of the independent system operator about the reliability of our electric grid, especially on days like today. And we've just gone through a month of pretty cold weather. I had to get a new battery in my car yesterday because it's been so cold for so long that just wasn't working. And what happens when you have these extended cold snaps, it stretches our capacity in New England to produce enough power for reliability. And the independent system operator has warned of the potential of rolling brownouts and blackouts if we had extended cold snaps. Thankfully, that hasn't happened yet. But let's not forget, this is baseload power. It's not a renewable resource that depends on the wind or the sun, which is intermittent. This is baseload, 24/7. And I would hope that given the jobs impact, and we've had significant closures of the independent power plants, and that's led to a reduction of jobs in the forest products industry. But I think what's different now is the loss of even more baseload power and what that's going to mean for New England. So with that, I think questions specifically about the bill should be referred to, the Burgess folks. But that's the sort of background for it. This bill is absolutely necessary if the plant's going to continue to operate.
Thank you, Senator, for your testimony. Other questions? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Senator Bradley, for bringing this in. I just had one question on line 12. I mean, I understand and support the intent of this bill. And I see you have the language there, may amend. Do you have thoughts about whether we could go with shall or?
You know, it would certainly be stronger if it was shall, but I think may amend is, at this point, if it passes, it sends the right signal without taking over the rate-making facility at the PUC. And it would be my hope that that would be what was sufficient. But, you know, ask that question of other people, too.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator, I just have one, or just with regards to what the real cost benefit to this is basically that we're protecting our base load so that we do not have brownouts, correct?
Yes.
What are some of the other benefits? Our forests are taken care of. So a lot of the trash, forest stuff, instead of it going into the landfill, got a great idea. Let's turn it into energy. Let's secure our base load with that wood that's being taken out of our forest. Is that a correct understanding?
Well, I didn't want to go into the testimony I've given many times in the past for the independent wood burning plants, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we have lost most of that capacity. It allows people to manage their properties, and the low-grade wood is turned into wood chips that then gets burned. It's a far more carbon neutral fuel, if you're worried about that, than burning either natural gas or oil or coal in particular. It's an indigenous resource. We have it. We're not depending on pipeline capacity. You remember the debate about eminent domain a few years ago. We're not dependent on coal and the environmental impact that coal has. Oil is very little of it is burned still for electricity production, but it's still a backup. And obviously the jobs are there too. And if this 75 megawatts, you know, it disappears, it could well be the end of the logging community in New Hampshire. So I think for all those reasons, it's vitally important. The one thing that's new, I think, is the fact that it's baseload power. Fuel diversity, obviously, but baseload power at a time in New England where the independent system operator is warning about turning the switch off.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator. Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Tom France, Department of Energy. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Senators. I appear here today on behalf of the Department of Energy. For the record, my name is Tom France. I'm the Director of the Regulatory Support Division at the New Hampshire Department of Energy. The Department of Energy opposes this bill, and as Senator Bradley said, there would be comments probably about the costs, and that's why we're in opposition to the bill. 3 years ago, Senate Bill 577 was intended to buy extra time to find a permanent solution. And as we enter the third year of that extension, we're still not sure what that permanent solution is. We wish that there were one, but these costs are high. The estimate at the time was that it would be over market in those 3 years by approximately 75 to 80 million over the $100 million that's in the cap of the cumulative reduction factor that was set out in the approval of the original contract. Even though days like today are certainly beneficial, and the plant is well in the money when the price in the ISO region, and especially in the North Country, these prices are well above the contract PPA price. Over the course of a year, this energy is approximately $20 to $25 million over market. So 3 times that, you get $60, $75 million over market. Those are additional costs to customers. So for those reasons, we oppose the bill, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Nope.
Not all at once now. All right, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate your testimony. All right, so Paul Grenier. Mayor of Berlin?
Yes.
All right, welcome, Mayor. Hope your travel was
Uneventful,
good.
which is the way I really like it, Senator.
Yeah.
Chairman of ARD and members of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, my name is Paul Grenier, and I recently took my oath of office to serve a 7th consecutive 2-year term as Berlin's mayor. I rise today in support of Senate Bill 271 for a variety of critical reasons. The future economic survival of my city and associated plant employees depend on finding a long-term workable solution. Enclosed in my packet, you will find my testimony of Senate Bill 577 that was referenced by Commissioner Franz from 2019, and the issues brought up then are as relevant today as it was in 2018. Our economy in Berlin is unlike that of any other city or large town in our state. Every population center in New Hampshire has either an interstate or a 4-lane connector highway within 10 miles of their border. I-93, the closest to Berlin, is 50 miles away and must traverse Franconia Notch to access. This really limits Berlin's ability to grow its economy and attract young people so vital to our area. But I'm here to tell you we've begun doing just that. About 18 months ago, Gorham Acquisition LLC, doing business as White Mountain Paper Company, purchased from bankruptcy court the assets of the last paper operation left in Androscoggin Valley. They purchased with eyes wide open, understanding exactly what needed to be done to finally make the facility profitable. They have made huge investments of money and expertise and are engineering out the legacy issues of a mill that has essentially changed very little since 1950. The challenge is the quality of labor, not unlike the rest of the state, which is exacerbated by the fact that our population in the Androscoggin Valley is roughly half of what it was 30 years ago. When the pulp mill closed in 2006, Berlin survived because of the skilled craftsmen still living here. We no longer have the luxury of another human exodus while trying to rebuild our valley's economy. With property values finally rising and North Country Growers' hydroponic greenhouse facility under construction, the nearly $4 per thousand tax increase and the corresponding 20% increase in water rates would destroy our community's confidence. The death spiral of any community is the realization that the future appears bleak. Burgess provided the spark exactly when Berlin needed it. Allowing Burgess to close also sends a very chilling message to investors that while you may be today's darling, policy changes in politics could pull the rug out from underneath you tomorrow. Yeah. When we teach youngsters how to play hockey on the ice, the biggest obstacle to success is how quickly they can develop self-confidence. I asked this committee to support 271, and let's remove the dark clouds so Burgess can develop the other 30-plus acres on site to take advantage of the unused energy and continue to build on the confidence Burgess injected to Berlin and Gorham in 2010. Enclosed is some data that tells the story of the financial impact Berlin has with the city of Berlin alone. I have included the DRA tax rate breakdown for Berlin. You will see our total warrant to be raised by taxes is approximately, this year stands at $17,172,060. Burgess alone accounts for 11.9% of the real estate tax collections at $2,050,831. For Berlin Waterworks, which is owned by the city of Berlin and managed separately by its own commission, the impacts are even greater. The total waterworks operating budget with debt service is $2,771,563. Water usage and assessment fees collected from Burgess is expected to total $664,000 or 24%. In fact, the revenue attained by Burgess Biopower essentially covers Berlin Waterworks' annual debt service. In closing, on behalf of my city, the communities that surround Berlin, and the industrial forest landowners in Coos County and the state of New Hampshire, I plead with you to recommend passage of Senate Bill 271 with a unanimous vote from committee. The continued relevance of our area is truly at stake. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We really appreciate your testimony and questions from the committee. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mayor, for coming down here to the tropical southern parts of New Hampshire. Right? I saw about the temperature up there the other day.
I'm very happy, Senator. I live where I live. Thank you.
I love it up there too, but not every single day. So, would it be fair to say that the state has recognized over the last decades the particular needs of the North Country in terms of economic investment?
I think the state has done what it could politically to help the North Country. I think when Burgess Biopower was born out of the ashes of the closing of the pulp mill, it made sense. We had this huge 12-story boiler that was only 10 years old that was rebuilt with the pulp mill. That asset could be very, very valuable in moving the property forward. What I'd like to point out to the committee is the pulp mill originally sat on 120 acres right in the center of Berlin. And the sins of our fathers and forefathers of 100 years of pulp and paper making made this land essentially not readily available for future development. So the power plant came in at the right time with the land obviously was subdivided, but Burgess has the willingness, the know-how to try to expand its footprint to help support other businesses. But the cloud of the cumulative reduction factor really stops any further development on that site. So I'm not asking for a gift. I'm asking for the legislature to work to try to resolve this issue so Burgess can fulfill its mission. And that mission is to develop a significant industrial working site with other tenants that can co-locate so that we can develop the center of town. It really, this has the ability to be win-win for the state, win-win for the city, and win-win for young families who, a lot of them don't want to live in Manchester and Concord. They want to live where the snow is deep, the air is cold, and ATVs are a part of our economy. We're essentially a very, very different breed from the large municipalities in the southern part of the state.
And so, if I may, Mr. Chairman, so, you know, I mean, part of your message is that while some people talk about, you know, the energy markets and the costs, that what is being left out of that calculation is the benefits that accrue quite truly to your budget, but also to the economy and people's lives in general.
You know, what I didn't talk about was the impact that Burgess has on Berlin and Gorham's local business community. It's incredible. You know, they shut down twice a year for outage services, and they hire almost all of the available skilled tradesmen that work in there for 10 to 12 to 14 days, depending on what's needed, plus the purchase of goods and services within the community. I don't have that data. If I did, I would have given it to you. I suspect that there's probably speakers behind me that have that data. But Burgess is interwoven in the fabric of the Berlin, Gorham, Androscoggin Valley area. And there's a solution, and we need to find it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Many years ago, after the United Airlines strike in 1985, the Flight Attendants Union, which struck with the pilots, was asked to come back to work. And the president of the AFA at that time, the Association of Flight Attendants, made a comment that I think is relevant, and I would ask if you agree, that we have to be very careful that we don't equate the cost of something with its value. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I think you will hear some testimony on methods of calculating the price of Burgess's power versus what the economic activity brings back to the state. This by far is not a negative situation. The state far exceeds, in Coas County, far exceeds the benefit from this plant's operation than it does from at some points in time, it may be over day ahead market pricing. But there's timber tax that the unincorporated places of Coas County get. So if you're lucky enough to have a camp in Cambridge, New Hampshire, the yield tax is collected. You're going to have a nice place on waterfront and pay zero property taxes because yield taxes cover it. So there's that whole economic dynamic of having folks from downstate who own nice properties up here. They come up here, they spend money, and they have recreation homes. They work hard. They deserve, if they're fortunate enough to be able to afford a recreation home. And in some places, in the unincorporated places, they pay zero taxes.
Further questions? I have a couple. Basically, we've been discussing landfills in the last couple of sessions, and if this goes down, where does that trash wood go? Does it go into the landfills?
I'm glad you asked that question because I'm also vice chairman of Androscoggin Valley Regional Refuse Disposal District. So I have a very thorough working knowledge of our landfill.
This committee is one-stop shopping.
Yeah, yeah.
So is that a correct assessment that the landfills will be basically it, or the wood just stays in?
That would be hard to quantify. My guess is that thrash and that low-grade wood would probably not enter the landfill, but it would stay out in the woods until lightning would light it on fire. So then you'd have a massive problem.
So this is a way to keep our forests clean.
I'm sure that there are, I'm not an expert in forestry. There are some people behind me that would be able to who are more than willing technically to be able to answer your questions more accurately.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much and appreciate the drive down here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Let's see, Kathleen, do you want to talk? Kathleen Kelly? Welcome.
Thank you. Got copies of my testimony that you'll have. Thank you, Senators, for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Senate Bill 271. My name is Kathleen Kelly. I've been a resident of Randolph and an active member of the Androscoggin Valley since 1988. As a mother of 4 adult millennials, a wife of a second-generation business owner, a retired CPA, I have been advocating for Coas County and most importantly the city of Berlin, our economic hub, since 1990. I've worked feverishly to diversify and strengthen the economy of Coas and Berlin through membership of the Androscoggin Valley recovery efforts, through the Chamber of Commerce, through school board, working with Governor Shaheen in 2000 and 2003, the New Hampshire Department of Resource and Economic Development. The people that we worked with during that time frame when the pulp and paper mills were in jeopardy again included Northway Bank, Isaacson Steel, Tri-County Community Action Program, Berlin City Ford, White Mountain Lumber Company, and many others. And we looked at everything from aluminum smelting to tourism as possible solutions at the turn of that of 2000s. Our middle-aged middle class exited very quickly as the pulp and paper mills were leaving, and we have data supporting that. We urgently looked for other industries that could take advantage of existing infrastructure like Berlin's wastewater treatment plant and the dedicated workforce that we had, the White Mountain Community College that was there, and the water and sewer systems. So we worked over a decade, almost 10 years, to attract prison industries, which brought younger population to work in our community, to attract tourists through marketing of the Northern Forest Heritage Park and other events, which might rebuild our real estate values and appeal to new employees, to develop the ATV and the snowmobiling and make it an integrated trail system to support our hospitality industry that still was up there. We also looked at renewable energy at that time, wind, solar, and biomass, to take advantage of the large amount of undeveloped land that we had. In 2008, we began to work with a biomass plant that came to fruition, I think, in 2013. Burgess Biopower, located in Berlin, downtown, as Mayor Grenier mentioned, is among the 10 largest, most technologically advanced biomass power plants. It operates, I think, at 90% efficiency. As you said, it's a base load power, or as Senator Bradley said. Burgess consumes approximately 800,000 tons of low-grade wood each year, which supports more than 220 jobs statewide, and injects $68 million to $70 million into the New Hampshire economy, mostly above the notch. The biomass plant allows Berlin to maintain a city infrastructure, paying over $2 million in property tax. The biomass plant also allows sawmills like the Milan Lumber sawmill, which is the largest in Coas, and White Mountain Lumber Company, a third-generation sawmill, to operate profitably and continue to operate. Tourism and renewable energy have become a vital part of our new branding of the region, Ride the Wilds. How many of you in 2000 thought Berlin would ever become a tourist attraction? You know, our industry has always kind of thwarted that effort. But we did it. We were rebranded. A lot of houses are selling now and becoming second homes. Citizens of the Androscoggin Valley take our role in maintaining the state's playground very seriously. But a healthy wood market is critical to preserving our recreational use of the forest. The low-grade wood, or slash, brought to the biomass plant and other heating systems that are in the area is critical to the market. Loggers in our region sustainably forest the northern presidentials, which allow you to come and play up there, to bicycle, to ride your ATVs, to enjoy the trails. They depend on this sustainable market of low-grade wood. The biomass plant keeps over 100 loggers working in our area, delivering over 800,000 ton of slash and low-grade wood of the estimated 1 million ton available in our forest. So it's just a small fraction, but it's still a critical piece. We need more investment in New Hampshire in wood products, like the Maine's investment in mass timber production that's going on right now. Without healthy forests, how can we continue to attract outdoor recreation enthusiasts like some of your family members? How do we keep cycling, ATVing, snowmobiling trails clear of blowdowns? We have watched the woods of California become very dry and consumed by wildfire, and the timber sold to the biomass plant will remain on the floor of the forest if we don't have it, and it will dry and increase our risk. The future of the North Country depends on renewable energy production. As the U.S. begins to deploy new technology, the region will be able to use more locally produced energy. Buying power from natural gas sources in Texas takes hard-earned tax dollars away from New Hampshire working adults, which is what will happen if this closes. We don't have a source of natural gas in New Hampshire. My husband and I watched as the stacks of the pulp mill came down, making way for the biomass plant with thousands of other residents in Berlin and surrounding towns. We watched in anticipation of a new future for the region in renewable energy, the energy of the future. We hope that this meant a bright future for our children and their children in the Androscoggin Valley. I urge you to pass Senate Bill 271 into the House for consideration. Thank you again for your time, and thank you, Senator Bradley and Senator Hennessy, for your sponsorship of the bill.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right. Damon?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning to speak in behalf in favor of Senate Bill 271. My name is Damon Frecker. I am the asset manager of Burgess Biopower for the ownership team. I've been involved with the project since about 2006 when I first did feasibility studies for the project. As has been previously mentioned, Burgess is a 75 megawatt generating station, biomass powered generating station that's been in operation since 2017. It is constructed on the site of the former Fraser pulp mill, and it rejuvenated a lot of economic activity in the region that was lost with the demise of the pulp mill. We're here today, and this bill is in front of you today, seeking the legislature's continued support for Burgess Biopower. And we're asking the legislature to send a strong message, a clear message to the Public Utility Commission that the legislature values the significant energy, economic, and environmental impacts made by Burgess Biopower. The findings of the bill document and confirm the value of the plant, and I appreciate the word value, and it directs the Commission to take expedited action on any dockets that may be appropriately modified to assist Burgess. Since the facility started in 2013, we've provided more renewable energy than any other renewable energy generating facility in all of New England. We generate 150,000 megawatt hours of clean base load, homegrown renewable energy that powers on the order of 13,000 New Hampshire homes that could be in a precarious position under weather situations like this, but for assets like Burgess Biopower. As Senator Bradley mentioned, the energy from the facility can be dispatched at any time. We run at a very high capacity factor, among the highest in the country for a biomass power plant. Last year we generated over 540,000 megawatt hours of renewable energy, which is about a 90% capacity factor. We're the fourth largest generator of power in all of New Hampshire. We'll talk a little bit about the economic. You've heard some folks mention that there are costs associated with the PPA that Burgess has, and there are. But as many have already mentioned, there are significant environmental and economic benefits as well. An independent economic impact study conducted by Polycon Research here in New Hampshire several years ago determined that the operation of Burgess Biopower results in over 240 jobs in New Hampshire and over $70 million in economic activity in the state. So you heard Mr. France speculate that the cost to the plant are on the order of $20 million, and the revenue of the plant, or the economic activity induced by the plant, is over 3 times that. I don't think we want to lose that. Over the 20-year life of the power purchase agreement, That results in $1.4 billion of economic activity in the state of New Hampshire. As Mayor Grenier mentioned, we pay significant fees, taxes to the city of Berlin, over $2 million, but I think one of the important parts is we are also one of the only biomass power plants, one of the only power plants that I know of, and I've been doing this for about 35 years, that shares its revenue with the city of Berlin. So for each of the past 3 years, we have shared in our renewable energy credit revenue of over $500,000 a year to the city of Berlin. And that's beyond just taxes and fees. The Burgess PPA has some provisions in it that create some very challenging and troubling circumstances for us that could jeopardize the operation of the plant as we get into the latter part of this year. And we are here in part to seek a collaborative process with all of those stakeholders that supported the original development of the plant, from the governor's office all the way through to the city of Berlin. We want to work with folks, as we have been very diligently for the past 3 years, to try to find solutions to the challenges that we are confronted with. And some of the areas that we think that warrant consideration were, you heard mention of Senate Bill 577 that was passed and signed by the governor in 2018. Don't think that got implemented at the PUC exactly the way the legislature intended for that to happen, and we'd like to revisit that. We have some concerns about the way this cumulative reduction factor in our PPA is calculated. It's a metric that's largely intended to compare the costs of the plant, the cost of the plant's energy to the market rate of energy. And we don't believe that the way it's set up does that particularly well. You can look at other locations in New Hampshire and New England that would show appreciable differences in what the value of that energy really is. And, you know, one of the important things with regard to the costs, as at least reflected in the PPA, and we've seen costs increase over the years. Well, just in the month of this past January alone, the CRF went down by over $3 million. That's the impact that Burgess's rate stability has on the energy market, is while natural gas prices have gone up and down and other energy prices have done similar, Burgess's price has stayed very flat and consistent. We also have some concerns about the way Burgess's electricity is handled. It's currently sold into the day-ahead market, which is completely acceptable and allowable. But in this day and age where many Fortune 100 companies are looking to decarbonize and acquire more renewable energy, we think that there may be much higher value uses for that power. We've been working with the city of Burgess, so we tried to differentiate ourselves from all of the other biomass plants. As we at the plant like to say, you know, we're not just chewing chips and making megawatts, right? We're trying to be a true active member of the community. We've partnered with the city for several years in looking at can we recover additional thermal energy from Burgess that can be used beneficially in downtown Berlin to heat the streets and the sidewalks, as has been done in a couple of other locations in the country. It's a really innovative project. We've spent a lot of time and money doing it. I'm an engineer, I'm a wonk, it's exciting, I like it. But it's something that we want to keep doing with the city of Berlin. And Senator Bradley wrote a letter of support to the grant application that we filed with the Department of Transportation for this project last year, and identified it as an innovative public-private partnership, an exemplary of what can be done with facilities like this. And that's really the exclamation point that I want to put on this, is that's the type of thing that we want to keep doing. Yeah, we're going to generate power, we're going to generate renewable energy. Hopefully we're going to provide rate stability and stability to the energy markets, but darn it, we're going to make an impact on the community and achieve that win-win that Mayor Grenier talked about. That's the conclusion of my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't think I have anybody else here to speak. Does anybody want to speak Is there anybody from the wood industry? Oh, Jason, there you are.
That on page 2.
Page 2.
Thank you.
I only have page 1.
In the beginning, right?
Thank you. It's okay. And you're with the Timberland Owners Association.
I am.
That's a lot of testimony.
Well, it's an important issue. Well, good morning. For the record, Jason Stock, I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. Our members, we represent timberland owners and those who work in the forest products industry and in the entire supply chain, from the landowner to the forester, logger, trucker, sawmill operator, and biomass power plants. I'm here today to speak in support of the bill, in support of Senate Bill 271. You have copies of my written testimony, and you also have a couple reports that we have pulled together to get at some of the questions I've heard during today's hearing about the economics and kind of what are the impacts beyond just electricity and kilowatts and megawatts. And I wanted to just briefly walk you through this, and then you can read that at your leisure, but briefly hit the high points, and then if you have questions, we can drill down, or as they say, get into the woods on it. So, the New Hampshire is, start with the forest, second most forested state in the nation. We have, and although they're beautiful to look at, and we all love trees, unfortunately, about 2/3 of them are what's considered low grade. I think the term was used earlier today, trash wood. These are trees that you can't make a 2x4 out of it. You can't make a piece of lumber out of it. And it's a function of the species we grow, our nature, our soils, and our climate. And so to practice sustainable forestry, and you have to think of forestry and the forest products, it's an integrated system. You need to be able to remove these trees and find a home for them. And biomass power plant has served the state of New Hampshire for many years as that home, or has played that role. And it's not unlike weeding a garden. You're growing carrots, you go in, and at about a month after they've sprouted, you start weeding out the thin, disfigured ones, the ones that aren't keeping pace, to allow the growth to hit your more productive, in this case carrots, in our case red oak, eastern white pine trees. It's a very similar process when you're in the forest and working in the woods. So that kind of explains the forest. There's an industry, I would argue it's probably the second oldest industry in the state, probably next to fishing, that has evolved around our forest and has evolved around our trees. And in your packet is a report that was done by UNH that quantifies this industry. It's about $2.5 billion a year. You don't see it because a lot of it happens in the woods. It happens at power plants such as Berlin, but it also happens in about 36 sawmills across the state. And so this is a robust industry, and it employs, at the time of that report, about 12,000 people that are directly or indirectly working in the woods. So it is a significant employer. And the other thing to really keep in mind is that these are jobs not down in the tech centers of the state. These are jobs in very rural parts of our state. These are jobs in parts of the state that, a quality job means a lot. Jobs with benefits, health care coverage, things of that nature. These are important jobs in parts of the state where jobs in general can be difficult to find. So, as you heard testified earlier, we had a very robust biomass industry. We've lost about 5 to 6 biomass power plants The second report in your packet, the one with the pretty trees on the cover, is a analysis that the NHTOA did in 2020 to kind of quantify what's the fallout. We lost these power plants, and at the same time, there was a major pulp mill in Jay, Maine that literally blew up that also had a ripple effect in our industry. And so what's the fallout? What does this mean? And to just kind of put it into perspective, we estimate the fallout was about $175 million of economic activity in the state. It's about 1 to 1.2 million tons of production was lost when those power plants and that pulp mill blew up. For those with an eye towards taxes, we estimate that was about $6 million, much of it local, but $6 million in taxes that no longer get paid, either timber taxes, taxes and fees paid for equipment, etc. And so that's the economic impact. As you heard testified earlier, Burgess is about 800,000 green tons. So that's a significant, and represents about $70 million in economic activity. To kind of put all of this in perspective, for fun, I went in and looked at DRA's timber tax records for the last full tax year, and that was we're in 2000. It was 2020. In that year, the state of New Hampshire, all species, all products, and these are commercial timber sales, were about 2.5 million tons. So to take an industry and then lose 1.2 million tons, and then lose potentially another 800,000, you can see where you start to lose a critical mass there, and it starts to get pretty dire. And the impact we're seeing, we've certainly seen contraction in the logging industry. That happened out of the gate. Where I had 3 crews, I now have 1. Also, where I, as a logger, I may do a dozen jobs a year. Now I'm only doing 6 because I don't have places to send the wood. So I slow the process down. Okay, boys, we're working 3 days this week. We're not working 5.5. And so we've seen that phenomenon occur as well. And so that was kind of the immediate impact. The impact on landowners, which is very interesting, is that fewer acres are getting treated. Like your garden, you're not doing the weeding and thinning that we would like to see in our forest to promote forest health, promote forest productivity. You're not seeing that. And I will say for landowners, biomass has always been a means to the end. No one buys timberland to grow biomass. You have timberland, you want to grow saw logs. But to get those saw logs, you have to get the biomass out of there and that low grade. And so biomass is a means to an end. You lose that means, your ends will suffer. The other phenomena that's really starting to come home now is the impact on the sawmill industry. Plymouth State University did an analysis on the state's sawmill industry, and it was about a $500 million industry, just looking at sawmills. And the impact that we're seeing at the sawmill industry is threefold. One, I take a round log and I make square lumber. I chip those slabs. Where do those slabs go? Or I take the bark off the log first. And in the case of pine and softwood, that can go into the mulch and landscape business. But hardwood bark, that goes to biomass. That is the outlet. I chip my slabs. Those slabs, that chipwood, that needs a home. And an average sawmill produces, again, to put it in perspective, 8 to 11 trailer loads of chips a week. So that's a lot of chips. That would be a lot of chips to go to a landfill. And I have had conversations with sawmills that have said, I don't know, if we lose Berlin, I'm not sure where I'm going to go with my chips. I don't know where I'm going to go. I had one sawmill actually look at landfilling and said, this would just choke them on chips. And they said, it just doesn't make sense. So sawmills, the first impact is chips. And how do you manage your chips? The second is on log procurement. So now we have fewer loggers in the woods. We have fewer acres getting treated. Now our sawmills are saying, all right, not only am I facing a labor crunch, which we've heard about nationwide, but at the same time, I'm not getting the logs I need to keep my mill running. And in fact, it was emblematic of this is I was at a sawmill in Bath, New Hampshire last week, the old H.G. Woods sawmill, a small eastern white pine. I'm meeting with them on Monday morning, and they weren't running. And I said, what's, right now lumber markets, we've all heard about lumber markets and lumber prices. Why aren't you running? We don't have enough people, and we don't have the logs to keep going. And so again, this is the impacts that we're seeing. And then the third impact on sawmills, it's a more long-term impact because fewer acres are getting treated and managed. They're looking out, they're making capital investments today saying, all right, where am I going to get saw logs 15, 20, 25 years from now? I have this landscape, this forest in the state. If it's not getting managed, where are my logs going to come from? I'm making investments today, banking that I'm going to have landowners and a forest that's healthy and productive, and landowners and an infrastructure that can manage that and provide the feedstock necessary for my sawmill. So the impacts are manifold with this. It reflects kind of the interactive nature of our industry, where you can't just take one piece or one thread of the quilt out or and say, all right, the rest will hang together. You start pulling threads, particularly big threads, like an 800,000 ton thread, it really affects your quilt. And so for that reason, we are in full support of this bill. We believe that in as much as this bill gets as Senator Bradley had mentioned, it sets the stage for a discussion and an evaluation. We think it's well worth it, and we fully support this bill, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Senator Guida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jason, for your testimony. It's safe to make a categoric statement that the reduction in disposal of low-grade timber equates to a reduction in the harvest of high-grade timber?
Absolutely, we are seeing that.
Okay. Second question, are chips, if a logger can't get rid of chips, or a mill or whatever, are they considered are they overseen by DES? Is this hazardous stuff or?
It's not hazardous. Let the record be clear. Wood chips are not hazardous. No, it's an interesting question though, because I've had people ask me, well, what did people do before there were biomass plants? Well, before there were biomass plants, you'd have a sawmill and you had a big metal teepee out back. And Friday night, during the course of the week, they'd throw the wood in the teepee. Friday night, they would light a match. They would burn those slabs in that teepee. They'd come in Monday morning and they'd start sawing again. That is clearly not allowed. It's not a, and with the biomass plants, it really became a really nice way to utilize this product in a way that's beneficial, as opposed to literally letting it go up in smoke. And on the wood side, you have loggers now trying to do everything they can to not produce low grade. And what I mean by that is, if I'm cutting a wood lot, number one, if there's a wood lot with a high percentage of low grade in it, they're just not getting cut. They'll say, sorry, tree farmer, I can't touch your lot. Good luck. And it's just not getting managed. If there is enough higher higher quality wood on there that they can do it. What they're doing now is they're trying to find any way not to produce low grade, such as leaving it in the woods, putting it in the trails, trying to do whatever they can to manage it. The worst case, and the absolute worst case scenario, is they do what's called high grading. And that is where you take the best and leave the rest. And that is a condition that you would be better off, honestly, and you talk to a silviculturist, they'll say you'll be better off with a clear cut where you just take everything, as opposed to taking a timber stand, removing the genetically superior trees and leaving inferior trees to occupy that space. And there have been studies done at Bartlett Experimental Forest up on the National Forest that show the horrific effects of high grading on a timber stand and its productivity. And they're very, although I love all trees, these are very unattractive, not a good stand, and it is just a bad situation.
Thank you.
I had a question. We discussed on one of our previous hearings on invasive species. What do you do with the invasive species if you don't burn them? And by the way, do they end up going to the bioplants?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we're seeing now, and it's particularly the insects. Emerald ash borer is the biggie. Emerald ash borer, which affects the ash trees, it's an invasive exotic pest that has come in into the state. Again, that is being able to manage those stands and going in and chipping those tops where the bug loves to eat. Being able to chip those and combust that is a key management strategy. We've also seen it on some of these red pine. There's a red pine scale. If you go over a Bear Brook State Park had a red pine stand that was an old CCC stand. It got infested with the scale. Biomass was a key management procedure in that as well.
With regards to the trees themselves, I think there's like a heavenly tree or something like that.
Tree of heaven, yeah.
Tree of heaven, and you're seeing them all over the place, and they grow like weeds. Do you burn those?
You can generally you certainly can. Managing invasive species gets really tricky. Sometimes if you cut an invasive tree or bittersweet or a glossy buckthorn plant, you almost energize it. So again, that's a situation where you bring your forester in and you lay out a plan where you say, all right, we're going to biomass this area. We can take some of that tree of heaven out. We may need to do some spray some of those stumps with a glyphosate or herbicide type product to keep it from taking off, or we girdle them. There's different strategies, but certainly biomass is an important tool in that land manager's toolkit.
Right, so if you cut down the tree, it could end up spreading even more, or just, you think you're doing a good job by getting rid of all of these, but you're actually probably just spreading them, and it'd be better off if we had a plan to get rid of them so that they're not overtaking our entire forests.
Exactly.
Did I say that right?
You did.
All right. Any further questions? We really appreciate your testimony. I don't think I have anybody else to sign up. Does anybody else want to sign up? Come on up. You wouldn't happen to be a logger.
But I am signed up.
Yeah. You are?
Yes. My name is Michael Waddell. I come to you from Gorham, New Hampshire. I'm the chairman of the Gorham Board of Selectmen.
You are signed up.
So, I'm here to support this bill. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Gorham. I've been involved there since 1987 in local government. I've lived there about 50 years. And when I began in local government, the general rule of thumb on the budget committee, which I was hornswoggled into, was that the mill paid roughly up to 25% of the property taxes. And it was the #1 employer in Gorham. And today, that same mill, we just signed a deal with them So back then, they would have been worth roughly 50 million bucks. Today, our deal with them is at 3.5 million, and they employ around 60 people. Contrast that with the Walmart down the street, which has a valuation of $17.5 million and employs 110 people. Clearly, the Walmart employees aren't making what the mill employees are. But in the course of that, in my 30 some odd years as selectman, budget committee member, planning board member, AVROD member, etc., I've watched my town change a lot. And when we lost the mills completely, an interesting phenomenon occurred. Now, I've been told that I'm somewhat barbaric in my practices. I live in an old farmhouse and I heat with nothing but wood. When it goes to 20 below for you, it's a little different than when it goes to 20 below for me. So naturally, when they shut all the mills down, I thought the silver lining would be that I get my wood cheaper. In fact, the cost actually went up because everyone went out of business. There was no longer anyone cutting in the woods. There was no longer wood available. So there are a lot of counterintuitive things that happened with the closure of the mills. And so we find ourselves here today. And the reason Gorham is so concerned with what goes on at the Burgess Mill is that while Berlin does have probably the or close to the highest tax rate in the state, Gorham is just behind them. And we have right now, I think, a fairly positive view of where our economy is going. It seems like every day I'm being approached by someone who'd like to open a business in Gorham, who'd like to build in Gorham, who wants to live in Gorham. And that certainly has not been my experience over the last 50 years. It's been a more or less a downward spiral from the heady days of the 70s to where we are today. Now, a lot of people have a hard time grasping this if they haven't actually seen it. But if you go up to that Burgess Mill, that 800,000 tons of wood is a visual. Like we could hide this building in it. And to shut that off with a flip of a switch, that's not a small calamity. As it is one of the many things that I do as I chair the town's forest committee. We have the second largest town forest in the state, the first being next to us in Randolph. And there are any number of logging jobs that we've simply put off over the last 5 years because of the low cost of biomass. Typically, we look at the low-grade wood to pay the road building costs and the extraction costs for the higher grades of wood. That's our situation today with the Burgess being open. To shut that plant, absolutely kill the wood industry, what's left of it. I guess the final point, and it's been addressed by some, is the economy overall. It's very difficult to quantify. You know, when you live in a place like that, there's only 2,800 of us in Gorham. We're right next to Berlin with just over 12,000. And we share everything. And when you try to look at the local economy, you get scraps of information. It's not really a hard science. But you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand what the non-production of 800,000 tons will mean to our economy. And right now, as we're in the upward spiral, we're adding businesses. My main street looked like a ghost town here not too many years ago, and now those businesses are largely filled. The Berlin-Gorham Road is coming back to life. That paper mill, yes, we signed a deal with them at $3.5 million, but you know what? They've got a plan to rebuild that, and we're counting on it. Now, on top of all this, one of the things that I need to do to convince people to locate in my community and build there is to give them some sense of stability. So if I don't leave you with anything else today, stability in a place like Coos County is everything. It's something we really haven't had over the last 30 years. We've had one unending disaster after another, and now we're starting to see the culmination of a lot of hard work, and we're seeing one success build on another. This would be a terrible thing if that plant goes down. So, that's what I have to say. Gorham strongly supports this plant, and we thank you very much for putting this bill forward, and I hope we have a long-term solution. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Senator D'Alessandro, do you have another bill at the same time that you,
Just 2 minutes. Do you have 2 minutes? Yeah.
okay. Donna, do you have anything that you'd like to?
Mr. Chairman, I want to get a question on the record, and I need a vehicle for it. And if Donna, if you would just come up so I could make my statement. And Senator Perkins-Cope, could you pass to her the letter we have from the consumer advocate? Yeah. So thank you for indulging me, but I thought something would be important to get on the record, and I looked out and I saw that Franz had left. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you, Donna. We have a letter from a consumer advocate which raises the issue of federal preemption on wholesale markets, and it references the Supreme Court Hughes versus Talon Energy case that says that ruled that a state may not disregard an interstate wholesale rate required by FERC, and raises the possibility that this bill might interfere with that. Would it be reasonable to believe that the use of the line may we use the word may on line 12 in terms of what we're asking the PUC to do in terms of considering biomass would prevent this bill from tripping the wire of disregarding?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I'm not a lawyer. However, I do believe that may is an appropriate word in that case. Our lawyers have looked at the legislation, and I never asked them this question in particular. I could have them take another look for you to see what they think, but nobody raised it with me previously.
And thank you. If I may follow up, I mean, the bill does talk about, and the consumer advocate recognizes that it says nothing in this bill should affect the wholesale markets, but because that word may is there, I just wanted to get on the record, and I thank you again for making that possible. Thank you,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Chair.
You're very welcome. No further statements?
Now that I'm here, we are not taking a position on the bill currently. We have spoken with Senator Bradley about a couple of amendments that we would like, and mainly it's just for ensuring cost recovery. That's been the term that I've been using all session. So, basically, it's a public policy discussion. This is a little bit different than our position in other years on other bills, but mainly it's because everything about the agreement originally has been very different. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate it. And with that, we're going to close the hearing, and we're going to recognize Senator D'Alessandro, SB 452 FN. And you're recognized whenever you're ready, Senator. Are we good to exec this after this file one? Jim?
She said she might have some.
I know, I'm not going to. I'm going to pass it. Yeah.
I thought that was important.
I thought, yeah. We can always introduce it on the.
How are you?
Appreciate that. Yeah. You have the floor, Senator, whenever you're ready.
Well, whenever you're ready, Mr. Chairman,
ready.
I'm ready.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of the committee. For the record, I'm Senator Lou D'Alessandro. I represent District 20, Manchester Wards 3, 4, 10, 11, in the town of Goffstown. And I come before you as the prime sponsor of Senate Bill 452 FN, having to do with lead in drinking water in schools and licensed child care facilities. Senate Bill 452 is to protect drinking water in schools and child care facilities. Let's state the problem. Children in New Hampshire are exposed to lead in drinking water in schools and child care facilities. No amount of lead is safe. I might say no amount of lead is safe for a child to ingest. Even small amounts of lead can result in permanent, irreversible harm, including loss of cognitive ability and behavioral problems. The best way to protect children is to prevent lead exposure in the first place. And I think in the last biennium, the Water Trust lent or gave to the Department of Education $1.8 million to get rid of lead pipe in schools and to deal with drinking water in schools. To date, I don't know what the amount of money has been spent, but we did appropriate that money in order to do that. So the best way to protect children is to prevent lead exposure in the first place. The EPA estimates that drinking water can contribute up to 20% or more of a person's total exposure to lead. As a result, SB 247, enacted in 2018, New Hampshire schools and child care facilities must test their drinking water for lead. Results reported to the Department of Environmental Services reveal widespread lead contamination in schools throughout the state. And as a result of that $1.8 million was given from the trust to take care of those problems in schools. With over 90% of the schools reporting lead testing results, 40% detected lead in drinking water. 25% of the results revealed lead between 1 and 5 parts per billion. 10% of the results revealed lead between 5 and 15 parts per billion, and 5% of the results revealed lead over 15 parts per billion. Compounding the problem, under the current New Hampshire law, schools and child care facilities are only required to remediate lead in drinking water when it exceeds a federal standard of 15 parts per billion. Importantly, the federal 15 parts per billion standard is not a health-based standard. It comes from the EPA's lead and copper rule, which controls, for curiosity in water systems, corrosivity in water systems. EPA's health-based recommendation, its maximum contamination level goal for lead drinking water is 0. The American Academy of Pediatrics health-based recommendations is for no more than 1 part per billion of lead in schools drinking water. So what's the solution to the problem? The solution, SB 452, solves the problem removing lead from school and child care facilities drinking water by establishing a health-based limit of 1 part per billion lead in drinking water. Now, in my youth, I was in the plumbing and heating business. My dad was in the plumbing and heating business. And one of the things that we did was replace lead pipe, particularly in the areas where I lived. I lived in the greater Boston area in those times. So homes in East Boston and the North End were covered with lead paint and lead pipe for the water systems. Now, there were many water systems that used lead pipe also in the underground in terms of bringing water. So you understand that the problem has been pervasive for a long, long period of time. And we've gotten rid of a lot of lead. I mean, we've certainly got rid of the lead paint situation in buildings, but the lead pipe and what damage that causes is severe. It's a serious problem. And as I said, we did take out of that out of the Water Trust, 1.8 million, and give it to the Department of Education to help with the drinking water problems in schools. This situation addresses the situation in terms of the parts per billion. It's a problem, and it's a problem that we've recognized. The question is, what about the solution? And this bill requires schools and licensed child care facilities to test drinking water for lead and to notify parents of tests with high levels. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much for your attention, and we'll try to address any questions that you have. We do have some material for you, and I think others may have copies of this, but I'll leave these copies so that you can make them for everybody on the committee. Lead exposure in New Hampshire, 2020, a data brief. That's one situation. Partnership for Emergency Economic Crisis, cutting lead poisoning in public cost is another item. And there are members, I think DES has some people here that will comment on this. I don't know if they're going to take a position, but certainly they're willing to discuss the problem and the extent of the problem. And I must apologize. I have to leave. I got another bill at the same time across the street. So rather than having a clone do it, I'm going over there myself.
Just one quick one, Mr. Chairman.
Quickly, yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I'm sorry.
I'm ready, Waters.
But,
Still waters run
Wouldn't
deep.
it be your understanding in terms of the cost of this bill that potentially what has been passed, the infrastructure bill, would provide some funding from the feds to take care of the cost of this bill?
Yes.
Thank you. That was quick.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention.
Leanne? Atwell? Not taking a position, but wishing to speak. Welcome.
Thank you. Leanne Atwell. I'm with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and I manage the program to test school and child care facility drinking water for lead. We handed out a letter of testimony. As you said, DES is not taking a position on the bill, but just wanted to provide some information to consider during your deliberations. So DES agrees that it's important to reduce childhood lead exposure. We were supportive of the original legislation that established the statute that requires testing for school and child care facility drinking water. And we work collaboratively with the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services Child Care Licensing Unit to implement the program. While lead can be a source of exposure, lead in drinking water can be a source of exposure, the childhood lead poisoning cases in New Hampshire are largely the result of exposure to lead-based paint and older housing stock. That being said, we recognize that the EPA standard of 15 parts per billion is not a health-based standard, and so when we have detections in drinking water at schools and child care facilities, we encourage them to address those and remediate them, so not to add any other potential burden that they may be getting from other sources. We have results from about 23,000 samples that were collected during the first round of testing that have been submitted to DES, and there were detections of lead in about 40% of those samples. Based on that information, DES prepared a fiscal note that was attached to the bill, trying to estimate the cost of remediation. We should note that anything that was detected above 15 parts per billion was already required to have been remediated and addressed. But you'll see the costs in that fiscal note in terms of our estimates for remediation. In terms of support for remediation efforts and to help defray some of the costs, as the Senator mentioned, the New Hampshire Department of Education received a grant from the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund in the amount of $1.6 million to reimburse schools for 50% of any remediation costs for addressing anything that tested above 5 parts per billion. And then there has been additional money in the federal infrastructure law that's been authorized but not appropriated to support additional testing and remediation at schools and child care facilities. Another note regarding the level of 1 part per billion. We note that many of the labs that are certified to test for lead actually have a reporting limit of 1 part per billion. That's the level where they feel confident that they can detect the lead and see the lead. And so typically, standard practice is to have a reporting limit that is half of the standard. So when you have a detection and an exceedance, you're confident in that data. So we just note that there are labs that have a reporting limit of 1 part per billion, but some even have a reporting limit of 2 part per billion, and so they would have to adjust their procedures. There's a few measures that are in the bill that would help support the program and make our tracking efforts in particular more effective. One of those would be a requirement to submit data to DES. So currently, those 23,000 results that I mentioned, those have all been submitted, but there's no requirement in the current statute to submit data to us. So we suspect that there are many facilities out there that have tested, but we don't have the data. So having a requirement to have the data submitted to DES will help us better track and analyze and really better understand the issue. Additionally, a requirement to retest after remediation is really important. If a school or childcare facility is replacing a faucet or replacing some plumbing or putting on filtration, it's really important to take a test afterwards to make sure that the lead was actually reduced and that it actually fixed the problem. And then lastly, we note that the bill makes an adjustment to the timing that's required for the sampling. So under the current statute, sampling is required every 5 years, 3 rounds every 5 years. And the statute changes that language, or the bill would change that language to be 3 rounds to be completed by June 2024. And that's to align with some federal funding that we have currently. We have grants from US EPA to pay for lab costs for child care facilities and public schools for 2 rounds of testing. So by changing that language, we would allow that funding to be able to better support the schools and child care facilities doing the testing. That being said, this additional money from the federal infrastructure law could also be used for testing, but we don't have a sense yet as to what that might look like. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Perkins-Coker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here. I have 2 little girls that are in daycare, so it's good to see this requirement coming through. But obviously, I think the concern is just to make sure we're balancing the need for safety with just the limited number of childcare facilities out there and the cost to young, working families for it. So a lot of what you've explained is very clear. I just kind of wanted to confirm my understanding. So right now, there's a grant for 50% of remediation costs when lead is detected above 5 parts per billion.
Right.
But the requirement to remediate is if detection occurs at 1 part per billion. So there's a gap there, right? Like what if you detect it at 3 parts per billion? Are there funds available to remediate?
So right now, the requirement is for remediation above 15 parts per billion.
Yeah.
And so the 5 parts per billion is, anyone that wants to address anything below that 15, anywhere from 5 and above.
Okay.
So if this were to be, the new standard were to be 1 part per billion, then there would need to be, we'd have to go back and look at changing that grant. That would be something that would need to be addressed, because currently it is set up for only 5 parts per billion and higher.
Okay, got it. So there's a gap there. Follow up if I may, Chair? Yeah. And then you're mentioning that there's funding available through the federal grants for 2 rounds of testing, and then 3 rounds of testing will be required by June 2024. So one round of testing is done by the facilities on their own. I see an average cost for remediation of $3,100, but I just didn't see the average cost of a test in all these figures.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the cost varies depending on which lab you use, anywhere between $15 to $30 per sample.
Okay, so pretty reasonable cost.
For the actual lab analysis.
Got it. And then just one last follow-up, Chair, if I may. which just left my head while I was asking it. It was on the standard of parts per billion. So obviously a lot of our emerging contaminants are tested at parts per trillion, and you mentioned in your testimony that labs part per billion is kind of the lowest they feel they can detect. Is that just the underlying science of detecting lead versus some of these other chemicals? Or I just was curious why, if you have any insight at all.
That's a really good
different
question.
for lead. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some labs that are certified that can go down to half a part per billion currently. But in terms of, why, can they get any lower than that? I'm not really qualified to speak on that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, I was just curious.
I don't-
Okay, thank you.
Does the grant, the federal grant, exclude private schools?
It does, yes.
Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to follow on that, would the federal grant provide any remediation money or just the testing?
So the current grant that we have can only be used for testing, and that's money that we've already received.
Yeah.
We've got it budgeted, it's on our books. The additional money that's been appropriated but not authorized, we've heard will be able to be used for remediation, but we don't know what that looks like at this point.
So thank you for that
Senator Better?
clarification. And a follow-up if I could.
Follow up?
All right, thank you. So, just to clarify, does the current water fund grant also cover daycare?
No, so that grant was given to Department of Education for schools, any public or private school.
So I guess to follow on that, the question might be, would it be useful to put in here, in state statute, that it is our intent that funding that may come from the federal government for test remediation also be available to daycare centers if we wanted that?
So currently, the funding assistance that we have to pay for the next 2 rounds of testing, that is eligible. Licensed childcare facilities are eligible for that, and that program is specifically for public schools and licensed childcare facilities. So any additional funding that would come that could be used for testing or remediation would be available to childcare facilities through that program. But again, we don't know what that looks like right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, these funds are available for public and private schools?
Not for private.
So there's 2 sets of money. The federal funding that's available for testing that we currently have is available only for public schools and licensed childcare facilities. That can only be used for testing. The additional funding that was to be determined what that's going to look like would be, we've heard, will be able to use for remediation. The other pot of money that is for remediation, that's the lead remediation grant that is from Department of Education, New Hampshire Department of Education. That's a grant through the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund. That can be used by both public and private schools.
I find it peculiar, thank you, Mr. Chair, that we are going to discriminate against children and their development if they go to a private school, they're still with toxicity in the water. I just find that challenging. And I'm wondering, is that a federal requirement or is that a state requirement?
The federal funding is limited to public schools and licensed childcare facilities.
Thank you.
Senator Waters?
Yeah, I had just one more on the testing issue. So I was a little unclear when I was trying to understand that you said that they like to be able to test to half of a standard. And so is that in a sense to tell us that if the current testing is generally they can do 1 part per billion, that maybe we should have in the bill a standard of 2 parts per billion in this bill?
I think that was just something that would need to be considered. So, that there are some labs that are certified to half a part per billion. Most are certified to 1 part per billion. So there would need to be some change on their end to be able to accurately report their data if the standard were 1.
So, if I may follow, you know, we heard from the Pediatric Society that 1 part per billion is what ought to be in in school water. Fair enough. But if we have that in here, does it mean that we may not have the capacity in testing that could get down to the 1/2 part per billion so that the 1 part per billion would be verifiable?
I think the labs would have to address that. I'm going to look to my colleague Cindy Clevens to see if she has anything else. I mean, that's certainly something that, the lab accreditation program would have to look into.
Thank you.
Further, Senator Guy.
Thank you. So, following on Senator Waters' question, so if we establish a standard of 1 part per billion, are we then going to test to a level of 1/2 a part per billion to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of the standard?
I think that would be, from a technical standpoint, that would be the preferred way to make sure that when you have an exceedance, that you're really confident in that data.
Is that not, that's, again, I find that problematic because you're actually testing to 50% of the statutorily established level. So I would go along with the 2 parts per billion to ensure that we're getting the standard that's set at 1. Now, if the lab wants to test its own capabilities down to 1/2 a part, that's fine. But so to ensure that they have the ability to determine the 1 part per billion. But I don't want 1 part per billion, meaning that we're testing schools and so forth to 1/2 a part per billion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, that the reporting limit would be 1/2 a part per billion, but then the exceedance, the standard would still be 1 part per billion.
Well, again, I think maybe I need to, if I may, Mr. Chair. Right, so if a lab gets tested to its capability to determine 1/2 a part per billion, does that certify that lab then to determine the 1 part per billion?
Yes.
All right, and then so the next part of that, if I may, is that the standard against which these schools are tested is to the 1 part per billion. They're not tested to 1/2. Only the lab is tested to 1/2 a part per billion. The school is tested to the 1 part per billion because the lab has been certified capable of determining 1 part per billion. I don't want 1/2 a part per billion in the schools. 1 part per billion, if that's a standard, is what we should adhere to, regardless of the certification standards for the labs.
Right, so I think the lab, if they were certified to 1/2 a part per billion, I think the typical procedure would be that they would report their results to 1/2 a part per billion. But that would be something that we would have to talk through with the lab accreditation program.
If I may?
Follow up.
That's a 50% increase in the level that we're testing to, which has catastrophic, potentially, expenses to the communities that are paying 50% to remediate that. I mean, I have a problem with you saying this is the standard, but we're going to test to 50% of that. Okay? Test the lab's capability, fine, but not the schools. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I mean, I think it might be fair to say that there's always going to be a margin of error in testing, and that perhaps having that 1/2 part per billion is just the way of ensuring that we have the 1 part per billion. But I guess my question would be, is could you possibly look into or just check with the labs and see if, what their take would be? Does this create a new hardship or expense if it's, at 1 part rather than 2 part per billion? And also, the remediation here would not be required if a school's water tested at 1/2 part per billion. It would only be required if it tested at 1 part per billion, or above 1 part per billion, right?
Correct.
Right, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Henry?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Henry Vayu, and I'm here on behalf of the Granite State Alliance of YMCAs. If you took all the Y facilities around the state, Nashua, Portsmouth, Manchester, Concord, in their daycare facilities, you combine them all together, they're one of the larger daycare facilities providers in New Hampshire. And there are two parts to this bill. There's the testing part, and then there's the remediation part. It's good to see that there'll be some assistance with the testing on the next two rounds of tests. The facilities that did the testing the first round essentially paid for the testing themselves, and now it looks like there'll be funding for the next two rounds of testing in a tighter time frame, but that's fine. So very supportive of that. The only concern that we have with the bill was something that Senator Waters, you asked the question, is, so the department has indicated about 40% of the facilities will probably fail at 1 part per billion, going from 15 to 1. And so about 40% of facilities are going to have to remediate. And it's clear that there's remediation support through the DOE for the schools, but hasn't been for childcare. And I know the department has indicated that the infrastructure bill authorized but didn't appropriate funding for remediation at schools and childcare. And there could be some money in the future. So I guess the concern that the childcare facilities have is if 40% of us are going to fail, how are we going to pay for this? And it's not quite yet crystal clear, to your point, of is there going to be any state assistance? And so that's just the one concern that we have.
Henry, are the YMCA's licensed childcare?
Yes.
They are. So would that be covered under?
So they're licensed by Department of Health and Human Services, not through Department of Education.
Does it have to be through the Department of Education licensing or? So it doesn't matter if you're licensed or not, it has to be through the department. Okay, I got it.
So that's the one concern is where's the money going to come from?
Right. Great, got it. Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony, Henry.
Yep.
Seeing none, does anybody else want to speak on this? Going once, going twice, closed. All right. I think I'm going to take your advice and wait for that amendment on Jeb's. Yeah. And with
I'm
that.
ready to go. I mean, I have some amendments that you want to do in executive.
No, I told her I wouldn't.
All right, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
thank you.
we'll close the hearings completely. You are dismissed.
Yay, recess.
I know. I'm quarterback. All right. So that. Huh? Yeah, I'm not gonna get it. I was gonna wait because what Donna said that she had some kind of. I wanted to push that, but I think there's a huge ripple effect with that. The bioplants. The cost benefit outweighs anything with regards to the cost.
And I love seeing my colleagues say that they, you know, the extra cost of energy be damned, there is a benefit here. I love to hear them saying that about renewable energy. Whoa!
The thing is,
just keep that thought in
there's
mind.
so many, well, I do, but I mean, there's so many ripple effects with it.
Oh yeah, I'm all for the biomass. I always have been.
But
Yeah.
you're basically something of the northern sphere.
No, listen, we've got this for this. The forest.
Oh, yeah. No,
Forest health is something that the state for a century, you know, for 120 years, the state has been concerned on forest health.
The cost of the energy didn't fluctuate, it stayed the same. You had the forest products that they produce, including fertilizer. Oh, I'm on this. Yes, sir.
Senator Waters, and listening to this too. So on the biomass bill, two things. I'm going to work with Senator Bradley and Donna Gamache on an amendment, which may include some of the stuff that Senator Bradley talked about today that she was mentioning. We're also, sometime in the next week or two, we're filing a petition at the Public Utilities Commission to have a status conference on the whole issue. So it kind of plays into what's in your bill, which is to kind of get things going over there. So
Good.
I didn't want, well, I'll share that filing with you, but I didn't want you surprised that we're also doing that.
No, that's fine. I was thinking of checking it today, but I was.
Yeah, right.
It's good to wait. It's good to wait.
Working on amendments, so, yeah. And it's not an early bill, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, it's good. All right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.